Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's TIA live stream, the new face of cargo theft and why freight brokers can't ignore it. My name is Anthony. I'm the host for today's live stream, as well as the Senior Education Manager here at TIA. We have a few housekeeping items to get through. First up, we're going to start from a word from our sponsor.
Freight isn't static, it's dynamic. It evolves. Today, freight brokers have more on the line, and they need to act faster than ever before. Rates move, capacity shifts, and customer expectations never slow down. That's why, for decades, brokers have trusted DAT. Now, we're evolving to serve you better. We've brought together innovative companies and brilliant minds obsessed with solving broker problems. And we've accelerated how quickly ideas become products, all to create a one-stop shop for trusted capacity, automation, and real-time insights. That means the largest, most secure carrier network in freight. It means full visibility to give your customers peace of mind. It means simplified execution to keep pace with a fast-moving industry, and real-time market insights to anticipate changes before they happen. DAT Freight and Analytics. We take the uncertainty out of freight.
All right. Thank you to our live stream sponsor, DAT Freight and Analytics. We appreciate it. If you want to learn more about DAT, please visit DAT.com or feel free to shoot us a message. And with that, we're going to move right on into our antitrust statement. Discussion, comments, and presentations during TIA functions must not refer to any past, present, or future rates, prices, or anything related thereto, include any reference to marketing strategies, include any discussion of boycotts of any person, product, or firm, or inhibit any members' employees from discussing employment with other member companies. Additionally, things you hear during the meeting that are confidential and private to TIA should not be shared publicly without its prior consent or used against or in competition with TIA. Next up, for questions during the session, we have some options for you to choose from. Feel free to put your comments or questions in wherever you are viewing this, whether that's on LinkedIn or YouTube. However, if you're not comfortable submitting your comment publicly, feel free to email us at education@tianet.org with the subject live stream. We'll aim to get to all of your comments and try to address as many things as we can today with a lot of time we have. But with that said, when you come back to review this recording, whether that's on LinkedIn or YouTube, or you're listening to this on Spotify, you can additionally send in your question after the fact. And if you could just put in live stream 519, that would help us get back to you. For more live streams like this in the future, please check out the TIA LinkedIn and YouTube channel and visit tianet.org to check out other member resources, some of which we might be discussing today. Especially if you are listening to this or this is your first live stream, we're really happy to have you here today, and we appreciate everyone's time. With that, I'm going to start adding in our speakers. So just bear with me, everyone, while we sort this out and we bring in our guests for today. And with that, I will let all of you introduce yourselves, starting with Lori. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a threat that's been quietly reshaping the logistics world. Cargo theft isn't what it used to be. Gone are the days of simple smash and grabs on the side of the highway. Today, thieves are organized, digital, and disturbingly sophisticated. They're exploiting technology, supply chain blind spots, and even our own operational habits to steal more faster and with less risk than ever before. This is the new face of cargo theft, a world where cyber tactics meet physical crime, where fake pickups look real, and where a single compromised login can cost a company millions. If you're in transportation, warehousing, security, or risk management, this isn't just interesting, it's essential. So settle in. We're going to break down how the game has changed, who's behind it, and what you can do to stay ahead. My name is Lori Zalek. I'm with Descartes, and I've joined today by an incredible panel of experts who are going to look at these changes up close to help you understand what's really happening on the ground and behind the scenes. So without further ado, I'd like to have Danielle from Genlogs introduce herself.
Hi, yes, I'm Danielle Spinelli. I am the Director of Partnerships at GenLogs. GenLogs, we're a company that has cameras all throughout the US, basically taking pictures of trucks and trailers. I'm using that for carrier vetting. And then on the side, I also have a podcast called Tell Me Everything, where I have Fraud Girl Fridays. So kind of my expertise on cargo theft, and why Lori, is so great to bring me on, is me being a broker for a long time, having that firsthand. So I appreciate you having me on, Lori.
Thank you, Danielle. Representing Megacorp Logistics is Winnie Wilson, who joins us with firsthand knowledge of how large-scale brokers are adapting to this new wave of criminal tactics. Winnie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Winnie Wilson, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Megacorp. Megacorp is a nationwide top logistics brokerage company. We service all over the United States, Canada, and Mexico, as well as international. So we're just excited to be here and to talk things all freight fraud.
Thanks, Winnie. And from Truckstop, we're joined by Lindsay Schumacher, who has been tracking the rise of fraud-driven theft and the role of digital marketplace in both the problem and the solution. Lindsay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Lindsay Shoemaker, General Counsel at Truckstop.com. Truckstop.com started as a load board, and now we have an entire suite of products. Really happy to be here.
Thank you, Lindsay. So today we're going to break down how cargo theft has evolved, what's driving the surge, and most importantly, what the industry must do next. I have a list of questions, and I really encourage everyone to kind of dialogue out loud. It's very interesting. We've obviously seen a lot of things happen in the last couple of weeks, and a lot of it kind of lends itself to similar risks and how to be more risk-averse. So, how has cargo theft evolved over the last 2 to 3 years, and what do you think is fundamentally different now?
I'll take first stab at that. So kind of how it's evolved is we were so into straight theft, and we would, advise drivers to drive X amount of miles after picking up a high value load because they would, they're being targeted, they were being followed. Now that still is a big percentage of cargo theft today. And I think that's something we kind of shy away from a little bit because strategic theft is so in everybody's face. But because what I think it was is speaking from a broker, whenever like 2020 hit, we all went home, and then we all, instead of taking phone calls and calling everybody here like day in, day out, we were emailing. And so because we were able to do that digitally, and we figured out like, hey, I can actually cover way more loads digitally, it took kind of that human element of talking to somebody over the phone and that process of vetting. And then the bad guys kind of just realized, hey, I can pretend I'm whoever I want to online, and kind of just went at it. And so that's why we've saw that big boom in strategic theft. And most of us in the industry, including like a lot of platforms out there, were like, what is this? And how do we get in front of it? And so I think now coming to today's in 2026, we've seen a lot of different strategies out there. I think we've done a great job at educating, but there's so much more that we can do with education, and that's kind of why the bad guys are still at it, and they still come up with new tactics and stuff like that because we are getting better at what we're doing too. But that's what I've seen.
No, absolutely, Danielle. And I think it's interesting too, coming from the freight brokerage for myself, 5-7 years ago, the most that we had to worry about was sending, an advance to an incorrect party, or, it was a few $100s that was stolen, or those are the things that we were trained. And these fraudsters have become more elevated in their tactics. They're more strategic. They definitely are more organized. They know how brokers operate. They go from broker to broker sometimes and identify where there's gaps. A lot of these guys, it's fast paced. It's day to day covering, load after load. And they know where to find those gaps. They know where they can essentially exploit those gaps, especially when there's pressure involved of needing to cover a load. So it's just changed tremendously over the last, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think the gaps that you're talking about, Winnie, they've taken advantage of. They're so sophisticated in the way that they are doing it. So they're taking advantage of these gaps, and they're constantly evolving. So I think anything that we probably say here today might be stale information by tomorrow. So I think one of the best things we can do, and I know, Danielle, you speak on this quite often, is take it back to the basics. be able to call the carrier, pick up the phone, and instill some of those safeguards that we can safeguard so that way our digital workflows aren't attacked as much.
Absolutely. Winnie, let's start with you on this question. Where are brokers most exposed, and do you think they know it?
I think when they're most exposed is when they're moving fast and they're essentially assuming things rather than validating. We talk a lot here about Megacorp about not answering questions in a question. So essentially, are you this carrier? Is this your MC? Is this your DOT? Essentially, when brokers, in order for them to really protect their company, they should be asking for the information and validating it based off of whatever platform that they use to validate that information. A lot of them don't know it, but a lot of times the fraud has occurred way before they're actually even speaking with the company. They're laying their groundwork. They're kind of feeling you out. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And, they're waiting for the right time. Even after they book the load, it's small shifts. It's driver changes the phone number. It's we're going to be sending another trailer because this trailer can't pick up. It's not always one thing at one time. It's multiple different things that kind of create this groundwork for the perfect fraud case. So it's essentially, sometimes it's not all at once, and you kind of have to learn the little signs and ask the right questions and validate those answers.
And I think you're exactly right whenever the questions with a question, because like coming from that world too, like sometimes you deal with drivers that are difficult to understand and they don't understand you very well. And so instead of taking that route of things, kind of making it where like, what questions can they answer, and keep digging in and asking more questions. Cause a lot of times they do slip up whenever you keep drilling them, or they'll be like, this person's asking way too many questions and I'm going to move on to a different broker who's not going to ask as many questions because maybe they're on to me. That's kind of what they're looking for in that hole. So good point.
Yeah. I think it's important to like keep asking the questions because carriers get into your trusted network. And then they are compromised. So continue asking those questions, continue revetting your trusted network. I think I heard Scott Cornell say at minimum every 6 months. If it were him, he would do every 3 months.
Also, just to kind of piggyback on the questions, I think a lot of brokers sometimes, especially when they're trying to, they have a last minute load, they need to cover it. They're intimidated to ask as many questions sometimes. Everyone is asking these questions. Every broker that is truly doing their due diligence in the industry is asking these questions because they're important and they're relevant to the carrier selection that you're choosing. So, being worried about asking too many questions or that the carrier is going to move on, if they're not willing to answer your questions, they're not the right carrier for you or the company. So I would just, continue to ask those questions because they are important.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with you. I've seen in my own experience where they're seeking to qualify instead of disqualify a carrier, when in actuality, in that tight capacity, high risk, got to do it quickly, they should be looking for the reasons to disqualify, and hopefully they rise above with proper responses. But go ahead, Danielle.
I was going to say, and I think that's where having a relationship with your shipper, because it is where whenever you have a load that's like hot and you're like, I finally found this like angel of a carrier who's going to take this load. Like, how is this guy even doing it? And you're so scared to make him fall off and find a different load. Because that does happen all the time. But it's having that talk with the shipper. Like, if you are in that desperate time, you're like, hey, I'm sending this guy in. This is all the information I have. I've drilled him in. I've done this, but I need you to also be checking here. Because it is at that point whenever it's that, 4:59 on a Friday afternoon, especially holiday weekend, like everyone wants to get out of there. That's whenever they really hit the worst. And coming to a new holiday coming up with Memorial Day, I think that's something we got to remember, and having that relationship with that shipper, because shippers are getting hit too. And I think they finally are awake enough to where if you have that honest conversation, they're probably going to look at you as like, okay, they want to protect my freight just as much as I want to. The fact that they're coming up to me saying, hey, I'm rolling the dice on this one. Like, I need you to check on the front end, because a lot of times we can only do so much digitally because we're not there. We're not sitting there with the truck. So having the shipper, validate that for you when they're there. So taking those questions and taking it a step further when it is that 4:59 Friday afternoon load that you're covering.
And I suspect the shippers appreciate the collaboration. Winnie, I'm assuming that I know in your business practices, you're very collaborative with your shippers. I've lived that experience myself, and I think they're quite willing to look at that carrier's signage on their truck, check their license plate, look at a driver's license as needed. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that, most of our shipper partners are very excited that this is something that's on our radar, that we're continuously investing in technology to support, that we're sending in the trucks, that we're telling them that we're going into those facilities. Like Danielle said, we're not there. We're not physically able to verify that carrier, while we can rely on technology like ELDs and geofence technology to tell us that they've arrived, it's really the ultimate partnership between our shippers to, verify if for some reason we need that extra validation. So partnership is crucial in these types of situations.
Danielle, I'm going to start with you on this, but by all means, Winnie and Lindsay weigh in. But walk us through how an identity theft fraud scheme actually works in freight. What's the playbook look like? And I know it pivots for sure, but what does the standard playbook look like?
I would say the most common, because there's a lot of different tactics of strategic theft, but the most common usually routes from some sort of cyber attack or cybersecurity flaw that they were able to infiltrate. Maybe that's where they're buying an MC, that's one way, but then they do have access to all the credentials that carrier had before, or they're just simply doing a phishing attack. It's kind of what we're seeing the most of right now, is they're going into someone's network, and it may not even just be that email. I've seen, I met with the FBI, and they were telling me that they're, if you get a link coming from like a carrier saying, hey, click on this is my insurance, and you click on it and nothing pulls up, right? Like that happens. What's actually happening is something is getting downloaded into your computer, and then they're living in your computer, and they could live in your computer for like 6 months, up to 6 months, or probably longer, who knows? And they're just waiting on that load, waiting for you to pull up on your screen this high value load. And they're like, oh, this is the one that I want. And so I think that's kind of the biggest threat right now, is more of a cyber security wise. I think that's one thing that you can really educate your team on, and do standard checks with your computer software on that. But typically they're coming in and finding that shipment. They are posing as that carrier. Sometimes they're even putting the placards up on the doors and making it all seem legit, or even rehiring the actual legit carrier to go and pick up that load and then rerouting them. There's so many different avenues that they have, because they've noticed that we've been picking up on those, calling the shipper like, hey, check if it's this carrier. Well, they're sending in the carrier, but then sometimes they're rerouting them. So that's like going back to those basics and having a conversation with the driver. Because sometimes a lot of times actually, the drivers are not in on it. They don't know. And they just think it's like a blind shipment, or it's going here instead of here. So having that conversation with like, hey, this is expectations on the load with that driver. This is where you're supposed to be going, confirming with them. But instead of leading them with those questions or those answers, like Wendy was saying, asking questions and letting them answer you, and then, reconfirming.
For sure. The playbook changes every day. There's different occurrences that we kind of go back to the drawing board and say, how do we create an SOP that encompasses all of these different fraud schemes and tactics? But, we're not just seeing things that are opportunistic. We're seeing we're not seeing people stealing for, the side of the road or insecure lots. It's more strategic. It's planned. Like Danielle said, it's definitely cybersecurity related. And you just have to be prepared to be able to train your employees how to handle these situations and how to have the right conversations. The one thing that we always revert back to is call the carrier after you book the load with them and verify that you booked the load with them. It's one phone call that can tremendously change the outcome of a fraudulent situation. Verify that you booked with the right person, that the person that you booked with is able to book loads on behalf of that company, that the person that you're speaking with saw the rate confirmation come through, or the link that came through to be able to download the rate confirmation. There's a lot of things that you can do that are just simple that really can impact tremendously the outcome of a fraudulent situation.
And to take it a step further, I've even seen asking, hey, does this driver actually drive for you? Is this within your fleet? Because sometimes right. Sometimes it's a bad actor of a dispatcher too. That can happen.
Absolutely.
So go in as many questions as you can validate that will take you. It's mind blowing to me sometimes whenever they actually do have a theft happen and then they do call. They actually then make the call to the carrier like, "Hey, where's my load?" And they're like, "I don't even know." And that simple phone call, yes, you're running through X amount of freight every day, but taking that little bit of time to do that can really make a difference. Great point.
Yeah, Danielle, I think what you're describing is like building a process that catches the anomalies rather than just some specific thing that we're planning for. Because if something feels off, these networks will pressure test these things. So if we have one occurrence that feels like, that might be a one-off, it likely isn't. If it worked, we should expect it to scale and that to be the next big thing that's happening or going to happen.
For sure. These bad guys pressure test with multiple different brokers, multiple different carriers. They find a new tactic or come up with a new idea. They pressure test it a couple times. I know right now Scott Cardell's talking about the Trojan driver that's coming up with a new tactic, right? So it's like they're tested out and they're like, "Oh, this works. Let's go." So you're definitely right. Like going back to the basics of that, what can we do as like a base level validation, because they are changing it every day. I mean, I see something new, I would say weekly.
One of the things that's really been troubling me personally is that some of this organized crime is turning violent. As you all probably heard about the driver whose OEM load was redirected and the driver was found deceased. It's very troubling to me. How are organized criminals operating differently than opportunistic theft? Like, how did they follow this driver? What was their playbook for that, Danielle?
Honestly, I almost go back to like it's the same type of criminals that I feel like they copy and pasted, like the drug lords and the drug cartels and that type of thing. They're copy and pasting those same tactics. So it's almost like go and watch some of those type of movies and see how they were doing things and copy and paste those same tactics to logistics. Obviously, it's a little bit of tweaking, but it's just as scary as those drug networks are, and even like police and FBI, they're seeing that a lot of these same organizations are tied to different, they're not just committing cargo theft, like they are also doing trafficking. They're also like drug trafficking, human trafficking. They're doing a lot more than just one crime. And so I think that's the way we have to think about it too. They have a lot more, they have more skin in the game and they're willing to do different types of crime. Like you said, hurting a driver to get what they want. I mean, that's not past them to do that because they do that in other areas of the crime ring.
And I think there's this misconception that they're just, that they'll take anything, they'll do anything to steal a load. But I think the reality of it is that I think they're patient. I think they wait for the right opening. They study load boards. They look into certain patterns between brokerage companies, and I think they really, once they find an opening, they learn from it and they grow from it. They're more strategic in their assessment of how brokerages operate. So that's why it's so important that you're consistent amongst how your brokers communicate to drivers. They're all following the right protocol, dispatching policies, making sure, again, we're asking the right questions and not validating answers in questions. There's so much around, how they're operating and how you create a strong organization around some of these, really awful things that are occurring.
And even like if you think about cluster theft is where they're grabbing a little bit off of each load and they're typically running like, let's say I've seen it as most as like 30 loads in like a 2-month period of time. They grab a pallet. Before that has happened, they were in someone's network. They were running completely legitimately. They were learning. They're learning how the shipper operates. They're learning how the receiver operates. How often what did they check on the BOL? How much did they do the inventory? Like these guys really take time to learn a load, especially if the freight is worth it. What's really scary is right now with like the data centers and all the things like in the US that we're doing, all of our knowledge and stuff is coming from, they're grabbing it from us and they're taking it overseas. So as like an American, I'm like, it's way more terrifying than just a load of whatever the material is. I mean, it goes further than that. And so I think there's a responsibility as an industry where it's like we have to protect not just the freight, but our knowledge that we have within America. So
well, I think that's a place,
but
yeah, not to scare everybody, but this is a really good important thing too. really understanding your own data privacy policies, your vendors' data privacy policies, all of that is very important, because once you bring in a vendor, and Lindsay, you may want to speak with this, but once you bring in a vendor, you want to understand what does that vendor do with the data that you're sharing with them, because getting it into the wrong hands obviously adds to this problem. Would you like to speak to that a little bit, Lindsay?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I always say, for all of like the really cool, amazing things that we can utilize and do with AI, so can everybody else. And the difference is just the intent behind it. And I think everybody probably on this call listening to this is aware that there are bad actors who will do what they can to do the worst things with that data. So yes, absolutely understand from a customer perspective what vendors are doing with your data. How are we utilizing it? Are we able to utilize it for our own products, so that way we're able to ingest that and create something that can be beneficial and helpful for the industry? And I think for the most part, the answer is going to be yes. That's really the limit of that. I don't know of any legitimate vendors who would take the data and that they would sell it, in an area where they didn't have control over that. But it's absolutely an important question to ask. And beyond just, your data and what people are doing with it, the data that you're receiving from the vendor, where is that data coming from? How often is the vendor receiving that data? Understanding just the flow of data, I think, can help brokers make really informed decisions as well. Because data is data, it's great, but it's what story is the data telling? And is it a factual story? Is it an assumptive story? What is that? And I think the more you know, the better decisions you can make.
And like you said, legitimate vendors, and that's something that's sometimes kind of hard whenever there's like so many new things that come here and there. Even think about the mass scale of ELD companies out there and things like that. Like there's some that we can validate and we know like they're trusted networks. Many of us that are on here, they have trusted networks. They've been around for a while, that type of thing. But it's like knowing where you're putting that data. Is it a legitimate company, and asking those type of questions. And on top of that, like how many. Like the bad guys are also trying to get into those networks. So what did they do to protect their cybersecurity? Because it could be where one of their employees ends up accidentally giving their login, and then they have access to everything. Like it can go down this huge rabbit hole. But I think definitely like knowing your vendor is really important.
Yeah, pretty often we'll have our InfoSec teams speak with our customers and their InfoSec teams in the case of our bigger customers. So ask the questions, because legitimate vendors, we're happy to answer them. We're excited to answer them. That's what we love to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to change channels a little bit, because we've talked about what the problems are. I think the most important thing to understand is, what can we do from here? So if a broker's listening right now and hasn't prioritized this one thing, what's the single most important thing to do first?
I think from the brokerage perspective, slow down, take a look at your processes. I know it's really hard to say to a broker, slow down, where it's a fast-paced environment. It's essentially looking at your dispatching policies, looking at your vetting policies. Like Lindsay said, the data is only as good as the person evaluating, and really having discussions internally about what it means when you're working, what your vetting best practices are, and educating the floor, shifting the mindset too, with these guys. Like I was, a broker, and, we're trained to, sell. Let's, continue to, expand our relationships, grow relationships. And then, now all of a sudden their position is really shifted into being, they're building relationships, but also, looking for, fraudulent bad actors operationally, having more, having a better understanding of what to look for and being trained in those specific areas. Their job has shifted in a good way. They need to be more, they need to have more visibility to some of these things to make sure that they're protecting their clients.
And just to piggyback, I think kind of the culture of your business needs to shift. Like if you can educate all day long, but if they're not incentivized or they're not rewarded for catching a bad guy, sometimes it's like, if I'm only getting punished for when I do something bad, it's like, just the human psychology of things. You're not going to take it as serious, or like, hey, I get rewarded so much for rolling the dice and hitting a big swing on a margin because I did take a risk. that type of mentality can shift it within an organization where your culture is based on, celebrating those wins of like, I even say like on a shipper, like if they almost like OSHA, they had like the X amount of days since the last, whatever health safety thing that happened. Let's do the same thing with like X amount of days since the last time we've had a load stolen, or like, hey, this guy caught somebody, so they get a gift card, or, like there's so many things you can do culture wise so that that education that you're drilling in their heads actually goes somewhere. And it isn't just like oh, cool, I have to sit at another seminar again because they think that this is important, but then again, they're good with me rolling the dice. So I definitely what Wendy's saying, but then taking that a step further with like implementing that in your whole culture.
Reward and recognition is always the best teacher, in my opinion. When it's punitive, it makes it makes an impact. But when you're rewarding people's success, as you say, hey, you caught a bad guy, or hey, you uncovered a potential, gap in our process, people are really proud of that, and that will absolutely shift the culture quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to build a process that makes sense for the folks that are implementing that process. So from a legal perspective, my job is to talk risk and compliance all day long. But whenever I'm going and I'm meeting with our revenue team, their job is quite different. So having those conversations between the different departments to say, okay, I built this thing. Does it work for what you actually do day to day? And I would say probably like 9 times out of 10, the first thing I build doesn't quite make sense for our revenue organization. Their objectives are different. The information that they receive is different. The speed that they may have to work might be different. So having that dialogue back and forth to make sure what I'm doing actually makes sense for the folks who are doing it. So that way they're also not only incentivized to do it, but they're able to actually do it, I think is step one.
And I think it's more than just the one, like just carrier sales or just customer sales, like accounting, like every part of your whole organization needs to be trained on this because they are hitting totally different segments. Like I've heard of like the fake shippers coming in. So like customers will have, or customer sales groups will have like the contact us on your brokerage page, which we kind of know broker or shippers don't, say like, hey, I want you to run 100 lanes for me. Like that doesn't happen. But you'll have like a new guy coming in on customer sales and like, hey, I got this great opportunity and this just fell on my lap. Kind of knowing like if something's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. But having that education throughout everybody, not just your dispatch team and not just your carrier sales team, I think is super important too. And that's kind of part of going back to like that culture part. It's the whole company. It's not just one avenue. But definitely you're right, Lindsay, with like with having different departments, each one should have a different type of process for what they do. That makes sense with what their workflow is every day. Otherwise, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
With the recent SCOTUS decision, I think it's, the chatter around the industry is, it all starts with a solid vetting process. Just like to ask the panel, what do you think a defensible vetting process looks like in 2026, not only from fraud, but from risk, from safety? What does a defensible process look like today?
Lindsay, take it away.
I can
Hey, girl. That was funny.
I'll give the legal disclaimer. I'm not the fact finder here, but what I always err on the side of is like, do the right thing. So if you're always doing the right thing, then generally speaking, it's going to be something that's defensible. So I think one of the themes of this whole conversation has been is there's really no like one silver bullet secret sauce thing that you can do and check every single box and build that and scale that. It's always going to be evolving. So to sort of sound like a broken record, review what your processes are, talk to people in the industry. There are so many phenomenal resources out there and sort of benchmark, okay, what am I doing? What are they doing? How can I improve? What can I share that I do that's really great? So I think going back again to just do the right thing. So have these conversations, have a process that can be able to adapt and change based on what the industry is seeing. Because I think that the level of sophistication that these bad actors have right now, it's a high level of sophistication that evolves really rapidly. So I think it would be foolish for anybody to have one single answer and say, yep, we've done it. We've checked that box. A privacy policy, I can follow the list of rules that a legislature publishes. I know that's good. There's really not going to be a single answer. So I think being aware of that is the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, I'm big on documenting your processes and then following that. And when you do have when there's so much gray area in transportation. So when you do come across those gray areas, having that information of like, okay, what's the next step? Like, how do we vet further? And not even just cargo theft. And I've been preaching that forever. Like, you need to know what to do on cargo theft wise on those gray areas, but same thing for safety. And so I think a lot of the playbooks that most brokers have nowadays with cargo theft prevention, having that same playbook for a safety part will kind of protect you on the SCOTUS level things. But going back to like you were just saying, having processes evolving, and then going to conferences, learning, listening to those podcasts, listening to these type of events, like us coming on this live stream here. Like, it's so important just to learn. You may catch oh, I do all those things, but I learned one new thing, and that one new thing could stop whatever happens in the future. I mean, you never can learn enough.
Agreed. And I think as far as, there's a lot of unknowns still, with the vagueness of the ruling. However, I think consistency on whatever your brokerage decides is your best practices and what you define as safe, consistency in following that every single time is crucial. But yeah, no, it's definitely going to be a learning period for us all.
I think that, from my experience, and I know all the panelists would probably agree, technology plays a big part in this process. Where do you think that potentially gives brokers false confidence? I'll ask you first, Winnie.
I think technology gives us the visibility that we don't necessarily have. And, technology shouldn't be your end-all solution. I think technology should complement your vetting best practices and your SOPs that you build within the company. We can use technology for a lot of different things, but if you don't have best practices and your company isn't aware or educated or understanding of why these SOPs are in place, I think you're missing the point. But I think, again, technology complements these best practices, and that's how Megacorp utilizes technology. Is we have good, solid processes that our employees follow, and then we use technology to complement those processes.
Yeah.
And I feel like this. Oh, go ahead, Lindsay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of great technology companies too, and I think they all do something a little bit different. There's a lot of overlaps, but there are also a lot of niche features that companies have, and I think are going to keep evolving, which is phenomenal. But I think having that consistent conversation with what is the technology actually doing? What data is it providing me? How is our system ingesting it? So we have several customers that utilize the same data sets for very different purposes. So understanding what that data means for you in your system to make sure you're able to utilize it correctly versus just saying, okay, I have this single solution, or maybe I have a stack solution, so I think I'm going above and beyond. But if you don't know what it's saying and how to interpret that data, then there's no technology solution that's going to be the answer for you.
I definitely agree. I think tech is there to help us speed up. I mean, if you think about how the manual process of vetting a carrier in all different areas, safety, cargo theft, all that, if we did that manually, how much time that would take, and we just don't have that time if we're moving them on a freight. But even if like a tech says yes on everything, going back to that human element of like, hey, I need to make that phone call, or I need to do one thing human wise to do that extra check. But tech's definitely there to enhance everything, give you, like when he was saying, like you have visibility, like kind of giving you that bird's eye view of the entire industry, or how has other brokers worked with this customer or carrier, or what are they doing on the roads, or what is actually happening with this carrier is more than what you can just see. So tech's definitely important, but it is not a silver bullet. If it was, we would not have these conversations.
And we wouldn't have 50 different technology solutions. There would be a single
Right.
solution. And one of the things I see with the brokers and shippers that I work with, they're using kind of a multi-threaded approach, multiple different solutions, kind of layering them together as part of their comprehensive vetting, monitoring solution. We're kind of coming up on the 5-minute mark. I thought we might answer some questions from the audience. One of the audience members asked, what's one thing that the industry is getting wrong right now? Danielle, I know you have a thought. I just saw that wince on your face.
Okay.
What are they doing wrong?
I guess it goes back to that technology where I think a decent amount of the industry is thinking that I have the silver bullet. I know everything. We haven't been hit for X amount of time and we're good to go. So that's kind of what I think the industry's doing wrong, is not evolving and continuing to educate themselves and updating their processes. I think you should be updating your processes every 6 months minimum. Like every 6 months, you should be reviewing what was your standards and what all you've been doing and what all is out there. And I think even going a step further, and with your technology that you do have, what have they done in the last 6 months to enhance my processes too? Because every tech that's out there right now, especially like the vetting platforms, is evolving. I mean, there's so many things that are coming out. Like I know, like at my company, we can't even say all the things that are coming out because it's coming out so fast. So going back to the processes, re-reviewing if just because you haven't been hit and you do have that thing on the wall that says that last cargo theft or the last safety problem that you had was X amount of time, doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable.
And also too, incorporating some of the, the brokers and as a part of your discussions for how to best protect your company. These guys are the front lines of all the communication between the carriers. So incorporating them into your discussions on processes and how, things that they've identified to make, their businesses stronger within your organization. We're a big believer in speaking, making sure that we're incorporating the people that do these jobs every single day into some of the decisions and the SOPs so that we can best protect our company.
Awesome. Lindsay?
I think I'll just repeat what everybody said there, but I think the biggest mistake people think is that they have it figured out. We won't ever have it all figured out. And I think that there's power in knowing that and just continuing to educate ourselves, communicate with the industry, and just evolve and make sure that we are updating our processes.
And one last thing just to throw in, go back to the basics. That phone call, I'm telling you, that simple phone call can really make a difference. And so back to the basics.
Yeah, we kind of entered the digital world a few years back where, the idea of complete digitization, not having to talk to anybody, auto booking loads, and there's still a lot of value in that. I don't want to discredit that, but I think with the evolution of fraud, theft, crime, I think it does help to actually have, I work with one particular broker who shared with me that they use an automated solution for visibility, but their representatives are still required to speak to a driver every single day. It doesn't just end with, hey, we're tracking that load and we trust that data. They get them on the phone and they verify, like, hey, where are you at? Like you said, Winnie, not telling them where they are, but asking them where they are and see, does it check? Does it check the boxes? So one more question. What would you tell a small broker that thinks this doesn't apply to them?
Well, I know there's we were probably talking about this before we came on here, but I know just because you're a small broker doesn't mean all these challenges and all these things that are happening, you should just close up shop. I definitely don't think that. I think there's an advantage to being a small broker actually, where you do have a little bit more time per load to do that investigation work, because if something does happen, you can get hit, harder, and it could close up shop type thing. But I think just kind of like I was saying earlier, if you think that you're safe, you're not. No one is, no matter what size of a brokerage you are. You going back to the basics on there, and then, like I said, evolving it. That's for every size company. That is not just a large company or a small company. It is throughout the entire industry, and all different, carriers should be doing the same thing. Brokers should be, shippers should be, everybody that touches the supply chain should be doing the same type of process. I know we're speaking to brokers right now, but it is all throughout. And then having that same collaboration with your vendors, like your shippers, and talking to them what their processes are, and going back to what the carriers are doing. I mean, having those relationships, which is also going back to the basis. Think about whenever back in the day before we had all this technology, we had the carrier that we'd call and hey, where are you at today? And having those type of conversations. So going back to, if we're not having those conversations, we're automating how we're booking loads. Well, then let's talk about how, what you can do with those relationships and hey, what do you do to protect yourself? And maybe that's how you can learn from them, or you can teach them something. So
we're kind of coming up on the end. I want to take an opportunity to thank Danielle, Winnie, and Lindsay. It's been a really good conversation. If you're hearing this after the fact and you have questions, be sure to send those in to the TIA Education Desk. Thank you all. It was nice being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just lastly, thank you all again for attending. We appreciate your comments and your interaction. We hope to see you on the next TIA live stream in just 2 days on Thursday. But with that, thank you again, Lori, Danielle, Winnie, and Lindsay for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.